Welcome, my butterscotch kings and queens. Our fearless host with CP is out today, and I am filling in as host. I have a very special guest joining me, Congressman Darren Soto, who represents Florida's 9th Congressional District. Among his many roles in Congress, he serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he is co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. He is also deputy chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Without further ado, let's get right to the conversation with Congressman Darren Soto. Well, thank you so much, Congressman Soto, for joining us. I am very excited to dive in. I want to begin by thanking you for your support of the annual Congressional Briefing of Women of Color in Blockchain on Capitol Hill. You supported us since 2019, and we are very grateful, and we'll be coming back to you this year because this year will be the 6th year. But it was also in 2019 when you were first elected as co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, which was previously created in the 114th Congress. Now, what led you to become a champion of blockchain cryptocurrency in Congress?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today, and looking forward to continuing to host you all up on Capitol Hill and hear your voices. It must have been, as early as 2017, I just got elected to the Congress, and I was told by a lot of folks, you want to specialize in a few areas because the Congress is a big place. And I remember watching the Facebook hearings with Mark Zuckerberg in the Senate and how little it appeared the U.S. senators at that time knew about technology, whether it's social media, blockchain, computers, or technology generally. I remember a lot of folks around me saying, you really need to step up. A lot of the younger members of Congress who actually are familiar with these technologies can play a big role. From that day on, I've shown a deep interest in making sure that the technology that I use on a daily basis or I'm deeply familiar with, that I'm a part of both establishing the right types of laws and funding to promote technology. And so we work on everything from blockchain, whether it's the cryptocurrency aspect of it, or whether it is the aggregating of mass amounts of information and in big data form, where then we can protect it through the blockchain from adulterating data. And then now you start using artificial intelligence to review those data points, and you quickly see how you could help solve some of the world's biggest problems. I also work on AI, generally speaking, as well as autonomous vehicles and internet privacy, social media laws, you name it. If it's technology, we work on it through the Energy and Commerce Committee. And we work on the FTC elements of this through the Energy and Commerce Committee when it comes to cryptocurrency specifically. And my belief is you're going to continue to see growth in this area as we have international transactions and more interest by newer generations in technology and having different ways to be able to do financing. So this is something we'll continue to work on and be a part of in Congress going forward.
Excellent. And you've been very successful. You've made an impact because you've led the way in policy making. I remember in 2020, your amendments on blockchain and the technology were enacted as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. That was the first time such policies became part of law, right? And so now we're embarking on finally creating a smart policy and regulatory framework that fosters innovation here in mainstream America. What's your vision?
Well, first, going into the initial amendments we were able to get into law, some of the easiest ways to pass policy in Congress is to do amendments to major pieces of legislation, like the budget and like the National Defense Authorization Act, the military policy bill. Both those bills usually are passed every year, although sometimes, unfortunately, they're not. And so we started by using the budget to do the de minimis exemption for the IRS so that folks who are doing de minimis transactions in cryptocurrency don't end up having a tax liability for that if it's under a certain amount, and that amount has changed over the years. We've done amendments on blockchain to store data and to do food tracing. So for the VA to store data for the USDA and FDA to help with food tracing, to use blockchain as examples. And then we've also put blockchain front and center in military because it can be used for short wave communications by encrypting them, as well as in data storage. So we got the first reports by the military briefing the Armed Services Committee on the uses of blockchain, and we'll continue to work on a lot of these going forward. Now we have, in addition, 3 terms running past the Consumer Technology Protect Act that got through the House, but the Senate, they still haven't passed it yet. So we've already passed this bill out of the House, or out of the House committee. I served on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and it would encourage the FTC to not only push for policies that can encourage blockchain and the use of cryptocurrency, but also consumer protection in those areas. So something we'd like to continue to work on, and hopefully we'll get this passed out of the House and maybe get the Senate to move on it midterm.
All fascinating, because I'm sure our audience, their interest was piqued because what you talked about were some real use cases beyond store value, right? Beyond financial service, everything from supply chain, value chain, authentication. And that's the potential of the technology. Now, I've always been impressed by your ability to advance policy on a bipartisan basis. You are definitely a consensus builder, a bridge builder. And there's a lot of enthusiasm right now for this new era where there is, a lot of positive action happening in Washington. And I've seen it firsthand that the work that you did it early on paved the way for this, that we can have this new era where, we're on track to move more policy, where there are more positive conversations. What's your thoughts, right? What's your take on the current state of crypto policy? What do you think is working? What do you think is not working?
So I think there's a lot of areas of common ground on technology policy, cryptocurrency being a growing area. Sometimes we have a bunch of big fights over how we correctly protect constituents in social media abuse cases, as an example, or privacy bills that we've moved but never quite gotten to law yet because of some partisan fights and different philosophies in how you regulate social media companies. But we're seeing a different trend with blockchain and with cryptocurrency generally, that we're seeing a growing bipartisanship on it. We saw with the FIT Act, which would have established jurisdiction predominantly in the CFTC, provided funding to help regulate the market, a registry, which would then provide a certain certainty and regulatory framework for new cryptocurrency. That bill got most of the Republicans and about half the Democrats, including some of our top leaders in the House, like Pete Aguilar and Nancy Pelosi, as yes votes on those bills. So we do see growing interest in getting this regulatory regime together. Of course, it got to the Senate, got some Democratic and Republican votes, didn't quite get there, and so I'm hopeful this term we'll get it moving through. But the trend has been to be more bipartisan in some of these areas. So I am hopeful that will continue because the biggest thing we need right now is a regulatory structure to give more certainty to cryptocurrency firms about what the rules of the road are, what is expected of them, what are the consumer protections. And then that gives them more certainty to be able to grow with the trustworthiness that they have. They know the rules of the road.
Yeah, the rules are so important because without that clarity, as you mentioned, it's hard for founders to innovate. And as you just outlined, it needs to be done on a bipartisan basis. That's the only way we're actually going to get meaningful legislation advanced. And, obviously, you mentioned a few bills. We talked about some of the work that you've done, but you reintroduced a few bills this Congress and a few new ones as well. So let's talk about some of the legislative packages that are on your plate. How about the Securities Clarity Act? What is the objective? Because, that sets the stage for market structure legislation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of bipartisanship, it is the Republican whip, the number 3 Republican in the House that I have co-introduced this bill with, Representative Emmer. So there is a further evidence of folks coming together and finding common ground on this. So the bill would make sure, since some cryptocurrency starts as a securities contract as they're getting the exchange up and going, and then converts to a token or digital asset, as we call it, where it may at first be more of a security, but then as the contracts it's a digital asset. It's no longer security. And so we want to make sure that it provides more clarity of when it's a security, when it's a digital asset, and that it won't continue to be a security throughout the life of the exchange when it really has become something different. And only in the beginning phases where you're putting together new exchange is it anything even remotely like a security. And so once the exchange is up and running and things are being traded, the digital assets are being traded, it would be treated as a digital asset. And so ownership and the regulation of it would turn to something more like what we envisioned in the FIT Act eventually when we get that passed as well. So it's recognizing that distinction from the beginning, the contract, and then it becoming a full-blown exchange. And it really is no longer at all even remotely a security. It's a digital asset, should be governed as such.
Excellent, measure, because for the audience, a lot of people don't realize that the sticking point of what's a security, what's a commodity is really impacting how we move legislation. So this bill and getting this clarity is important because, as you mentioned, something that starts out as a security may not end up as that, is being transacted or is being leveraged in a platform or in a project. So we need more clarity on those moves. Now, let's shift to the Deploying American Blockchain Act, which is focused on the Department of Commerce. I don't know if you know this, but I served in the Obama administration and I was a political appointee at the Department of Commerce at the Economic Development Administration. So I know the power of commerce. So I'm thrilled that this bill is focused on leveraging, the various resources across the different agencies within commerce. Tell us more.
Sure. Well, as you know, we see a lot more activity in the federal government through the SEC and the CFTC with regard to cryptocurrency and blockchain than we do commerce. They're just starting to be more active. And so the Deploying American Blockchain Act would really encourage them to be more focused for policy pertaining to the deployment, use, application, competitiveness of blockchain technology. I know they're doing some work, but we really want them to focus a little more on that. And then it would also create a blockchain deployment program at the department. I'm a big fan of the Department of Commerce. I'm literally on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I work every day with officials from Commerce and believe they are the premier agency for business and for wealth generation, especially turning small businesses to mid-sized businesses to large businesses and fostering a cutting edge technology. And so we want to see even more effort by Commerce to focus on some of these fintech areas from a economic development focus as opposed to the regulatory focus that is more proper in hopefully the CFTC solely one day, but right now the SEC, CFTC, and a little bit, and the FTC will have always some role as far as for consumers. So this bill's with Rep. Kat Kamek, my fellow Floridian, and we've worked on a couple bills related to technology since we're both on the Energy and Commerce Committee together.
Yes. And you mentioned that you serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. So much of the policy conversation has been around what's happening at the House Financial Services Committee or what's happening on the Senate Banking Committee. And those conversations tend to be anchored around store of value, around financial services. And the good thing is once we take these conversations outside of these core agencies, Energy and Commerce gives us a latitude to talk more about the economic opportunity or even some of the benefits you mentioned earlier, such as value chain or supply chain. So excited that you're really looking from that prism of the Energy Committee and seeing what can be done there.
Sure, absolutely. And Commerce does need to play a more active role in that. In addition, I was on the Ag Committee the last 2 years, although I tried to get back on. It didn't quite work out, but the CFTC also plays a big role. And so I was proud to be able to vote for FIT in committee. In fact, we had most of the committee on both sides of the aisle vote for it. And we had hearings with the CFTC. The Financial Service Committee is still going to be where the main action is to develop this original regulatory sphere. But as far as the economic development of the work that you did in commerce and others, that's the area that I'll continue to be active in.
Wonderful. Well, we'll be following. Earlier, you mentioned consumer protection and the importance of that. Let's get back to that. I'm a strong proponent of risk mitigation because there's so much patriarchy implied in the traditional way of approaching consumer protection, where there has been a let's protect communities of color from these spaces and places. And where we know that we want to increase access, we want more participation in the traditional financial system. So for me, risk mitigation means that we need to make sure all consumers have guardrails. And those guardrails should include financial education, tools to combat fraud and scams, and making sure that there's safe access for all. What are your thoughts on, as we move forward with consumer protection and risk mitigation, how we can balance those priorities, making sure that there's access while we're making sure there are guardrails?
So I think the key is to focus on guardrails in the most extreme cases of fraud while giving freedom otherwise. So for instance, like a common thing that happens in cryptocurrency, the pump and dump, where we just saw a couple high profile incidents of those over the last couple of weeks, where you literally boost up with investors with the intent that they're going to all sell within a 24-hour, 48-hour period. People think, oh, this is going up and up and up. And it was all a scheme just to get folks, right? We want cryptocurrency to be used as a currency. Of course, it could be an investment too. And that's what people invest in foreign currencies too. So there's that aspect of it. But that scheme would be one where we would want to get involved in, because that was deliberately people trying to make it seem much more valuable than it is. Everybody invests and then they take it out. And it's really obvious if it's over like a 24, 48-hour, 72-hour period, as opposed to the normal ups and downs of a cryptocurrency that's well bought into. There's another practice called whitewashing, where you buy at a higher level from the intro of a new cryptocurrency, and then mark that as your value, and then you just pull all that value out immediately. And so these are the types of extreme cases, right, where there is an intent to defraud those who are trying to enter these exchanges. Those are the ones that we want to make sure we police. But like the daily ups and downs of any investment, we need to make sure that people have some freedom to make those choices and those risks when it's just a matter of the market. Look at the stock market, just $7 trillion just evaporated, right? I mean, it's crazy, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have people invest in the stock market because it goes down sometimes. That's just the regular day-to-day risks of investing versus an actual scheme to defraud. And I think that's the difference. We don't need to protect people from themselves from the day-to-day risk of investing, but we do need to protect people from outright deliberate fraud scams, which happen on occasion, not often, especially with the more established cryptocurrency exchanges. You don't really see that, but some of the new ones, if it's a deliberate fraud scheme. And I do think, when it comes to, I'm the number 2 member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. I'm the deputy chair, and I've been a big proponent of cryptocurrency for many years. We see both the Congressional Black Caucus, API Caucus, and other communities of color who are in caucuses in the Congress be active in this space. Our constituents are active in this space. And, the way I look at it is, one, cryptocurrency is going to continue to be more and more important for international transactions. Many of them in the Caribbean, Central, and South America. I'm a Puerto Rican, so a fellow Caribbean. And this is something I'm looking very closely at. And I have a lot of small businesses. A lot of international transactions happen in Orlando because we have folks coming in on vacation. It can help with the local trip advisor or travel agent, all these excursions that people order, even local mom and pop hotels, of course, for remittances. We have a lot of folks right now who are here from Haiti and Venezuela in Central Florida, right? And Cuba to a certain extent, although more of them are in South Florida. Those countries have either collapsed or they are under dictatorships. And so the fiat currency, it's all over the place. And so this has been one of the ways, especially in Venezuela and Haiti, where this is actually a steadier currency than the currency available in those countries right now, where you have hyperinflation or really not even much of a government in some of these places. So I think in both those areas, this affects Hispanic peoples across the Americas. And so we're going to continue to work on these issues, knowing the importance to both these areas for my constituents. And I know there's many other cases, but I know those are the ones that my folks I hear most about.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about remittances and where Congress is debating stablecoin legislation, and, looking at who gets to issue stable coins and what are the guardrails for consumers. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to remittances, it's one of the areas where we've seen huge success in terms of making the process more efficient, cheaper, and making it more accessible. And thank you for your comments on scams and fraud, because, scams and frauds are not unique to cryptocurrency, but they are, scammers out there are leveraging cryptocurrency. So how do we empower consumers and make sure that they have the tools, but also making sure that we're going after the fraudsters and scammers that are agnostic about the tools, but we want to make sure that people are safely accessing, digital assets in the ways that they choose to.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
And then you just mentioned, your leadership on the Hispanic Caucus, and I've participated on panels during the annual CACI conference with you. And as you just mentioned, communities of color, young people, working class people are the earliest and continue to be the largest adopters of cryptocurrency. So financial inclusion has been and continues to be an important conversation as we're looking at how to grow this industry. What are the rules of the road? And certainly financial inclusion needs to continue to be part of policy making and rule making. What are your thoughts on how we make sure inclusion and access continue to be top of mind?
There are spaces in our communities where people are unbanked, where they don't have access to microloans, and they're not exactly going to be taking out huge loans or have the credit worthiness if they want to start a small business, as a classic example. Maybe they start out of their home. Maybe they just need a few $100 or a few $1,000s to be able to start, and they have had credit issues before and they struggle with banks directly. In these spaces where there's not a lot of money involved, there's not a lot of options. And so I think whether it is some of the other fintech products like microloans, or whether it is some of the more creative ways to finance through cryptocurrency, some of these smaller businesses, most businesses started as an idea and very small at first, and then they grew over time, right? I was just in Poinciana High School in my district. We got some funding for them to do an entrepreneurial program in Osceola schools. And so I got to hear kind of a Shark Tank pitch from several high school students that were starting their own internet businesses while still being in high school as juniors and seniors. And we'd heard ideas like florists, but like highly personalized flowers for individuals, the next generation sneakers, next generation nail and hair products for curly hair was one of the big ones the other day. Physical fitness online. And all these kids had these smaller businesses. I mean, their seed money could have been $100 to buy the website, $1,000 to buy the first refrigerator for their flowers, and they're not even graduated from high school yet. So these are the kinds of spaces where young people who are more savvy to technology can utilize some of these financing devices to help them with these small businesses. And most of their transactions, it's all online. They don't have storefronts yet. So all this, whether it's online through currency, through storefronts, through the transaction itself, other than the flowers, you pretty much got to bring them in person, in IRL, in real life. But these are the spaces that we already see and that we'll continue to see to grow as we have more and more e-commerce and small businesses, home-based businesses with low barriers to entry, but not zero. They'll need some financing in some ways to conduct their transactions. And so this will be one of those growing areas.
Yeah. We talk about democratization of finance when it comes to crypto, but we forget about entrepreneurship and small business growth and how accessible blockchain and cryptocurrency is. And I'm glad you brought up the example. I love that, the concept of going from building in high school and taking it to market just as they do in college. But I think most people don't talk enough about entrepreneurship, how the $3 trillion crypto market was actually created by entrepreneurs and innovators and creators. And this industry is accessible to them and even traditional small businesses that have to innovate. So I think that's one of the areas where we need to talk more about is the small business and entrepreneurship is the engine of the U.S. economy. And this technology, cryptocurrencies, can help spur that in the innovation economy.
Absolutely. And I look forward to future conversations.
Awesome. Well, we're wrapping up, and I have a few last questions for you. One is there a fun fact that you'd like to share? Something about you that maybe we don't know?
Sure. Maxwell Frost and I have a band called Astromax. You could hear our music on rock and reggae stuff. He's a Cuban descent. I'm of Puerto Rican descent, right? And you can check out Astromax on Spotify, iTunes, and other streaming services.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I had no idea. And so do you guys perform live?
Yes. In fact, we performed at the Christmas party for Bold Pack, which is the Hispanic caucus's political arm. I'll be playing in the Caribbean and Floridian Festival this weekend, the CAFA Festival in Kissimmee, and we do a couple covers and some originals. So on Sunday, it'll be 2 Bob Marley songs and then an original Astromax song called Treasure Island. It's about one of the beaches over in the Tampa Bay area that I really love.
Oh my goodness. Astromax. You know what, for audience? Go check it out.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's definitely a fun fact. Now, is there anything you want to compel our audience to think about? To call to action is something that we like to open up to our guests.
I would say think of new and exciting ways that you can utilize cryptocurrency in an entrepreneurial setting, right? We talked about a few here, but there's going to be a lot more. And how can we utilize it to stabilize finances in countries and among our family members who may struggle, especially those who are abroad, as well as new ways to help small businesses, for those of you who are experts at this, implement being able to accept cryptocurrency at their small businesses, because some people will need that advice to know how to implement it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, please tell our audience how to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to follow you, your website, on social media? I know your tour schedule for the band.
The best way is on our website. Everything's online nowadays, www.soto.house.gov. Sign up for our newsletter, which you can do online, and also feel free to email us with ideas you have or give us a call. We obviously get reports every week of all the emails, phone calls, letters we get in, and feel free to speak up. And we want to hear from you as well as your other members do. We definitely, most of us, I'd like to think all of us, get the numbers each week of the different phone calls, the issues, and we take it into serious consideration as we're voting, proposing new laws, oversight, budget, you name it. So let your voices be heard.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us. And I hope you and Congressman Maxwell Frost will consider writing a song about crypto.
Maybe. Well, our work on NASA is what inspired the name. So we are into technology. So, well, thank you for having me, Cleve. It's an honor, and looking forward to hosting you on the Hill very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.